Hey everybody, it's me, Brian Easton, author, autobiography of a werewolf hunter. Thanks for joining me here this evening. I've been planning on doing this for a while and just now getting around to it. We're going to call it Whiskey with a Werewolf Hunter and hopefully make it a regular thing. So let me just start out by saying that for those of you who don't know, I've written 4 books in the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series. The first one was actually entitled "When the Autumn Moon is Bright," and that was self-published back in 2000. I want to say 2001, but I'm not sure about that. Permuted Press picked it up in 2007, I'm pretty sure, and put out a second edition of that and retitled it "Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter," which had just been the subtitle the first time around. So this is what it looked like, and there's a little glare on it there, but get the idea. And so the first book opens the story of Sylvester Logan James, the main protagonist, anti-hero of the series. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him, a little bit about the book series. Like I said, for those of you who don't know, since this is our premiere episode of Whiskey with a Werewolf Hunter, we want to make sure we're all on pretty much the same page as much as we can. Sylvester Logan James, just Sylvester or Sly or SLJ. He's an orphaned child. His mother dies in childbirth. His father is killed when he's 13 years old by what turns out to be a werewolf. This happens before his eyes, and it's very traumatic for him, as you might imagine, especially for a kid in the throes of puberty and at the threshold of adolescence. His father's friend, we'll say for now, Michael Winterfox, who is an old Cheyenne mystic, the last of an ancient dog soldier subset, warrior society, takes him in to raise Sylvester and teaches him what he knows of the Redosnan tradition. And this is mostly because he can see in Sylvester the hatred already beginning to brew for the beast, as he calls it. And so, over the course of the first book, we watch Sylvester go from this troubled youth and grow into a man and to a borderline sociopath, I should say. The vendetta, his feud against the beast, which he makes personal, becomes his politics, his religion, his reason for being, drives him in everything he does. He becomes obsessed with it, like no one has ever been obsessed with killing werewolves before, you would think. So he embarks on this very dangerous lifestyle. It doesn't have any idea what's coming. But Michael does. And he tries to shield him as best he can. And the best thing he can do for him is to give him the knowledge he has from the Redosnan Warrior Society. So he teaches the kid. The kid grows up roughly, 17 years old. This is 1967, 68, so he enlists in the United States Army by crossing the border from Canada, which is where all of this originally takes place, into Montana, signs up for the United States Marine Corps, lies about his citizenship and his age, and goes to the war. Infantry, Vietnam. Or not infantry, the Marine Corps. So he goes off to boot camp. He's there at Parris Island, South Carolina, and goes through the whole thing and winds up in Vietnam. The whole point of him going to Vietnam is not out of a sense of duty or patriotism. It's to get some real-world trigger time, some real-world experience when it comes to killing, when it comes to fighting. Because this war that he's going to fight is going to last him the rest of his life. And he knows he needs every edge possible against such a supernatural adversary as the beast, as the werewolf. And so that's his entire motivation for uprooting from the Canadian Rockies and going to Southeast Asia to fight a war he really doesn't know all that much about initially. So the first book sees him through that, sees him coming back home. He winds up, hard to adjust to civilian life, of course, like a lot of Vietnam veterans had problems with. But let's not make any mistake about it. Sylvester doesn't suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder caused by the war. What he suffers from is from this hatred that just keeps blossoming inside of him for the beast. And this is the source of his trauma. So it winds him up. He ends up in prison at some point. I'm not going to give away a lot of details. If you haven't read the book, I'm going to save something for the imagination. And I'm just going to give you the nickel tour of this deal. So he goes to prison for a while. He goes through some hardships there. And all this is toughening, it's conditioning him for the vendetta that he's chosen to pursue and what's going to be coming for him down the road. So that's Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter, the first one. Okay, and there's a lot more to it than that, but that's how it gets started, and you can follow this guy's story arc through the rest of the books if you like. The second in the series is called Heart of Scars. There's a look at the second edition of that. I did the cover for the first edition, which is now out of print, but this is what the second edition looks like. And all these are available on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. Heart of Scars sees Sylvester go from where he had been considered more of a hero type person. He definitely goes full-fledged anti-hero in this one. In fact, some people have even accused me of turning him into a straight-up villain in Heart of Scars because of his animosity overflows the banks of the supernatural. It overflows his true quarry and expands to anybody that's had anything to do with the beast. Even people who haven't had anything to do with the beast. His hatred is just right there on edge and flares so easily that he's pretty much a walking time bomb. And this makes him quarry for supernatural, we'll say, entities other than the werewolf. And he becomes was entangled in a lot of supernatural things that torment his mind, torment his soul, and really take him to the edge of where people almost stop caring about the character. And that was my intention, was to make you see how terrible this character has become and take you right up to the edge where you're just about ready to flush him down the toilet and say to hell with you, and then bring him back. And maybe I've done that for some people. Some people I know I didn't pull it off with. But that was the idea. The entire series starts with the quote by Friedrich Nietzsche. The old quote about he who fights with monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster, because when you look into the abyss also looks into you. And if there is a defining thesis, a defining statement for the entire series, that's it in a nutshell. That's what we see happen to Sylvester. He fights with monsters, he becomes a monster. He looks into the abyss looks back into him, and it's on. Well, the last book in the trilogy, the original trilogy, is called The Lineage. Now, the lineage is a word that we use to describe the entire race, I'll say, of werewolves, even though that isn't really the best term for it. Werewolves as a whole refer to themselves collectively as the lineage. And so this is the title of the third book. The third book is a lot different, I think, than the first two. It brings Sylvester back around. It pulls him back from that abyss that he's always spiraling down, and kind of pulls him back a little bit, and it becomes more stable, I'll say. Less fire and brimstone, more cold venom. He's no less enthusiastic about his feud. He's no less committed to the total destruction of the werewolf. But he is more, we'll say, relaxed about it, more content with the idea. Even content's not the best word, but you get the point of what I'm saying. He becomes more conditioned, I guess, to it, and just kind of rolls with it. And he winds up crossing the entire globe in the last book in search of one single werewolf. And I won't tell you who that is if you don't already know. But I think if you like the first two, even if you didn't necessarily care for the second one because of how dark it got, I think you'll pay off at the end if you read the trilogy through and finish the lineage. So I've gone on with that for quite about enough before we actually have some of the whiskey I've been talking about. So the creature for the night is my friend, the gentleman from Tennessee, George Dickel. Now, I'm also friends with the other gentleman from Tennessee, and you know who I'm talking about, but George is my favorite when we're talking about Tennessee whiskey. So we'll have a little bit of that and keep on going. Now, I told you a little bit about Michael Winterfox and how he was Sylvester's mentor, taught him the ways of the Redowsing Warrior Society. So after the original trilogy, my plan was always to do something with him. And I finally pulled the trigger on that last year, and the resulting work was the Winterfox Journals, Book 1. Now, there's going to be more than one of these, obviously. There may even be more than 3. Michael Winterfox lives to be about 100 years old, and he's been in the game, we'll say, since he was an infant. So he's got a lot of stories to tell. World War I veteran from a mostly Native American or First Nations unit that fought against the Kaiser in France. And that story is yet to be told, but that's going to be the second one in this series. So that's what I'm involved with now, is telling the story of the man who taught Sylvester everything he knows. So that's pretty much the autobiography of a werewolf hunter series in a nutshell. Like I said, it's the Nickel Tour. You can go to my website if you like. It's werewolfhunter.com with 3 W's in front of it. And it's got a lot of interviews, articles, just different information about the books. You can go there and read more about it if you want. Or drop me a message on Facebook or an email, Brian at werewolfhunter.com. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. I like to talk to the readers and get some feedback. So you're welcome for that. So the next thing I want to talk about is getting away from my book series. I want to talk about the horror genre in general. Now, horror's been around forever, as we all know, and a lot of us have different conceptions of what horror is. I mean, it means different things to different people. One of the best things I've ever read on this subject of horror, the horror genre itself, when it comes to TV series, movies, fiction, things like that, popular culture horror, is actually written by Stephen King, and it is not one of his works of fiction. I think it's probably the only, or at least one of the only, non-fiction books he has ever done. It's called Danse Macabre, or Danse Macabre, depending on where you are in the world. My beat-up paperback copy looks like this. It's got his mug on the front of it. And this book is kind of an anatomy of horror. It's his exploration of the subject. And he talks about, his first experience with it, his first kiss, so to speak, and how he kind of looks at the entire genre. Now, fundamentally, he breaks it down into 3 parts. Under the umbrella of horror, he puts terror as the finest emotion. Not horror, terror. Now, terror, as he describes it, and I tend to agree with him, is that thing that you fear that you do not see. It doesn't actually have a face, at least not yet. But you are afraid anyway. You ever walk down the hallway in the middle of the night because you have to use the restroom or something, and you've got a hallway mirror there, and maybe you've just woken from a nightmare, and as you're walking by that mirror, something tells you not to look in it because something might be staring back at you? And so you resist the urge and act like you never thought of that in the first place and just keep walking and you shake it off. That's kind of an example of terror. The fear without a face. And he calls it, like I said, he calls it the finest emotion. And it's hard to achieve terror. You have to be a really good storyteller to achieve terror, in my opinion. Which is my biggest problem with the horror genre today, is I'm partial to terror as I am horror. And I'll get to that in a minute. But terror is well, I mean, you look at terrorism in our modern society and how it's affected us. It's psychological. It plays with your mind. You may not have anything clear and present to deal with that's threatening you with bodily harm, but it's out there, and it may be close. You don't know. And that's one of the things about terror. Well, underneath terror, he then puts horror as a kind of a secondary thing. He says in his writing that he'll go for terror, and if he can't terrify, he'll horrify you. So horror, as he defines it, and again, I tend to agree with him, is when that terror does have a face. It's the vampire fogging up your glasses out of the darkness. It's the apparition that materializes out of nowhere and scares the socks off of you. It's every monster basically operates on a theater of horror, as long as you can see it. Now, if you don't see the thing, you just think you know what it is, then you've fallen back into the terror category. But horror itself are monsters. Now, monster movies, I am down with. I've been down with monster movies since I was a little kid, and they are my favorite kind of movie. I love the old Universal classics and the Hammer horror films, and if it's got a cool monster in it, sign me up. I'm going to watch it. Even if the rest of the story sucks, I want to watch it because I want to see what that monster looks like and how cool he is. And if it's not cool, at least you tried. Not enough people trying to do terror, and not enough people trying to do monster movies, as far as I'm concerned, in the horror genre today. Most of the horror genre today seems to me to go for that third aspect that King talks about in his book, that underneath terror, underneath horror, is revulsion. Now, when this book was written, I think it was like 1978. So he was talking about things like Alien and Jaws, The Exorcist. These were horror movies that dealt with revulsion as far as he was concerned. The chest-popping scene in the Alien, the pea soup vomit in The Exorcist. These kind of things. Because, like I said, King tells us he'll go for terror. If he can't terrify, he'll try to horrify. And if he can't do that, he'll go for the gross out, i.e. revulsion. And so that's where the horror genre today seems to me in popular culture. Although I will say that there does seem to be the attempt to crawl out of that pit and to bring it more back to storytelling and more back to suspense, to some of those finer aspects of the genre that I like. And King agrees, so, there you have that. So with that in mind, with all that in mind, we're talking about Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter, and it's more about the monster hunter than it is the monster. I mean, when you get right down to it. But the monster plays the pivotal role. If he's not there, there's no point in having a monster hunter, is there? So Sylvester may be the monster hunter, but the werewolf, he's the big bad. He is the horror that's coming at you. Now, the reason that I put the werewolf in my books over zombies or vampires is, first of all, I've done it since I was a little kid, and I don't remember liking vampires or zombies all that much. And to tell you the truth, I still don't prefer them to werewolves or even gargoyles as far as that goes. I'm with the underdog, pretty much. You've had enough vampire movies, you've had enough zombie movies. We've read about this ad nauseum. Let's let some of the other guys have the stage for a while. And so werewolves. I mean, even when I started writing, werewolves weren't that big of a deal. I mean, you got a movie about them once in a while. You got American Werewolf in London, and you got The Howling, or vice versa, on the chronology. And then you had a whole slew of spin-offs from The Howling. But for the most part, the werewolf has been a very uncelebrated monster, and I don't know why. Well, I think I know why. I think I know why for movie purposes, because it's a special effects guy. It's a special effects monster. You can't have a good werewolf and have crappy special effects. You just can't. You turn off like the rest of the bastard children of the Howling, and you either don't show the werewolf at all, or you show something that looks like it's wearing a bear suit. But aside from that, the werewolf in my mind is the most single horrifying monster, at least in common parlance. Now you may find you find some creepy stuff from other cultures and other parts of the world. But as far as United States of America, Western culture, the werewolf, to me, it's it. It's the epitome of evil. In fact, as I see him and as I write about him in the book, he is the incarnation of the beast, which is why they call him the beast. Right? He is hell's apex predator. He is completely powerful, ultimately unconscious, has no conscience whatsoever, has the capability and the desire to do you bodily harm, and not just a little bit, to torture you, to rape you, to eat you. You pretty much come up with something that a serial killer has done, the werewolf's already thought about it, and it's on his things to do list. I guarantee you. So you have something that not only has the will, the burning desire to do these things, it is his very nature to do these things. Add to that, an enhanced strength, an enhanced height, claws and fangs, in some cases that are stronger than steel. If we're talking about certain werewolves in the mythology that I put down in the books. And if you can get a handle on that, if you can really grasp that, you've got a terrifying creature that is going to stand shoulder to shoulder with anything else you can put down. Hell's apex predator, like I said. And that's how I look at them. These are unredeemable monsters, the ones that I write about. Now, like I said, I love the Universal monsters. Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman, I love it. I've loved Lon Chaney as the Wolfman since I was just, small. But this is not my werewolf. This is not what I write about. I don't write about people living under a curse and haunted by this thing they don't deserve. And as cool as that is, it's still not my werewolf. My werewolves are completely unsympathetic. They don't take their shirts off gratuitously. They have a will of their own, and it is completely monstrous, their will. So, that, to me, is horror. My challenge comes in on writing that. Now, I can write about the Monster Hunter, and it's kind of a dark fiction adventure kind of a thing that weaves its way in there. And I do my best with the horror part of it. Whether or not I'm successful is that I'll ultimately leave up to you. But I do what I can. At the end of the day, though, my goal is not to write a horror novel. It's not to write a horror series. I'd like to be able to, and hopefully it falls into that category with you. But ultimately, I'm writing about the man. I'm writing about the monster hunter, Sylvester Logan James. And that pretty much brings me to what I want to call Let's Talk Shop. Monster hunting. Monster hunters go back to, they go back in mythology to Marduk and Tiamat, Grendel and Beowulf. They've been all throughout history. But when we're talking about popular culture, books, movies, Abraham Van Helsing and the Fearless Vampire Killers, Seward and Quincy Morris, who, by the way, is one of my favorite monster hunters of all time, just because he's Texan and has a Winchester rifle that he uses. Quint from Jaws, another good example of a great monster hunter who I totally idolize. The guy or the girl who decides that he's going to or she's going to go after these creatures, these things that go bump in the night, is either crazy or has got a set of drop-forged cojones on him. Because when we're talking about the monster, We're not talking about a serial killer. We're not talking about a bad guy that the police are going after. We're not even talking about some super villain that the Avengers have to go tackle. We're talking about a supernatural creature from the bowels of hell, who and this is in my mind. See, regardless of what we're talking about, and what kind of person does it take to go after that kind of thing? I mean, really. Like I said, you have to be crazy, or you got to have a lot of stones. Well, my character may be a little of both may be true for him. But I like monster hunters because of that, because they're badass. You don't, just for my money, you don't get much more badass than the guy who's willing to go after a blood drinking vampire with powers, straight from the depths of the pit with a wooden stick. That's balls. And I dig that about him. It's the same thing with Sylvester. He's got a gun and they fire some silver bullets and stuff, but your chances of seeing and hitting and aiming at that if you're just a regular guy are slim to none. Even if you've got them, they're going to come up. They're not stupid. So that's why I like monster hunters, and that's why I like the subgenre of monster hunters. I want to have a little bit more of the creature here. It is whiskey with a werewolf hunter, after all. So, I have a friend named Miles Booth, who is a publisher of an outfit called MB Press. And the first efforts that they put into publishing were Monster Hunter anthologies. The first one was called Legends of the Monster Hunter, and it was Leather Denim and Silver, Legends of the Monster Hunter. And it had a really nice collection of anthology stories, short stories about different individuals, their backgrounds, and the monsters that they went after. Really cool stuff. If you can get a copy of it, and they may be even out of print, I don't know. You can put it on Amazon, Google it, or search on Amazon, and may be able to find it. If you do, I definitely recommend it. I wrote the foreword for that, which is not why I'm recommending it, but for the content of the stories. The second one, I believe, was called The Trigger Effect, and they had a third one, Use Enough Gun. And all three excellent anthologies for the Monster Hunter. And I was glad to be included in those publications. And the one that I have here is called "Is the Use Enough Gun" copy. It's the third one in the Legends of the Monster Hunter series. And I wrote the afterword for this. And in the afterword, I'm not going to read it to you verbatim, but in the afterword, I talk about monster hunting and how if you're a monster hunter, you're not long for this world. In fact, you're in a fight you never had a chance of winning. The only thing you can really hope for is to go down with your boots on, with your gun firing, and to give a good accounting of yourself before the death bear takes you down. On the other hand, I also say that just because you're a monster hunter doesn't mean you get to go down with your boots on. You're just as likely to wind up a statistic, an accident on the highway, 3:30 in the afternoon chasing God knows what, but you're in a pile of wreckage, and by the time they cut you out of it, whatever you're after is long gone, and no one will ever know where you were going or why you were in such a hurry. You're not likely to make the obituaries. You're dead of a massive coronary out in the boondocks somewhere. Boots on, but not the most glorious way to go down. Not to find the swan song you could hope for. Because in this line of work, monster hunting, we're talking about people who ride the ragged edge. So too many pills, too much liquor, not enough sleep, name your poison. Your chances of going out with a bang are not all that great. So you have to do it for some other reason, even than glory. I mean, forget about doing it for money. Forget about doing it for, conscience or conviction. You're probably just not going to make it out alive at all, and you're definitely not going to. The odds are not with you that you're going to make it out going out the way you want. Every man owes God's a death, and if that's true, the monster hunter has to pony up sooner than most. And there's more I want to say about this, but this is our first date. Let's save something for the honeymoon. We'll talk about more of this stuff later on. Next time we talk, we'll talk about the series a little bit more if you want to. We'll talk about horror a little bit more if you want to. You let me know. We'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. Monster hunting. Before I go, though, I did want to say, I did want to answer a question or two. I had some Facebook friends ask me some questions about the book and about some different things. And so in no particular order, I kind of looked at some this afternoon. And so the first question that I'll ask that was asked me on Facebook was, have we seen the last of Sylvester Logan James? The original trilogy made his story arc, told the majority of his story, but at the end of it, we're left a little bit uncertain as where the future lies. And I'm not going to say any more than that about the ending of the lineage, but will we see him again is the question. And my answer to that is yes. I'm not done with him. The world, the life, the feud is not finished with Sylvester Logan James. It may be a while before we see that. In fact, it will be a while before we see that. But eventually, we'll find out the next chapter in the life of SLJ and where that goes. And I've got ideas for it. I work on it a lot, putting it together, sticking it in the back of my mind, writing it down for later. And what I've got right now is really cool. And I think it's just going to get cooler as I have time to think about it and refine it in my head. So, Chuck, you don't have to worry. You've not seen the last of Sylvester. He'll be back. So, with that in mind, I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. It's been fun, and I hope we can do it again sometime. So until we see you then, Brian Easton saying good night. God bless.